It is now my privilege and pleasure to introduce to you our next speaker, who is our duly elected leader of the Labour Party, Corbyn.
Thank you. The Dorset countryside has never looked more beautiful than it does today. Thank you all for being here today. We remember the Tolpuddle martyrs. That's what's brought us together here today. We remember the sacrifices that they made. And it's quite important to remember the sacrifices that many made long before any of us were born, that we might live better lives. We too need to ensure that we give to the next generation better lives and even more rights and justice than we have ourselves. The Tolpuddle martyrs took their oath to each other. They took their oath to their community and their class in order that they would not be exploited. They were taken down the road to the assize courts and sentenced to transportation. They set off a flame that ignited the thoughts and consciousness of millions around the country. Why is it those 6 men who merely stood up for their right not to be exploited were so brutally treated? That campaign brought them back from Australia, but it also brought back the idea that yes, when you do things united, when you do things by campaigning, you can win and you can change things. And they went on to found the trade union movement in Britain that we all do so well from. And so we should use this festival as we do to share ideas and share inspiration. I've been coming to this festival for many years. It's had its ups, it's had its downs, but it's grown and grown and grown. Because there is a thirst of people to come together, learn about new ideas, learn new experiences, think about things and think about how they can translate different ideas. We do learn from each other's poetry, we learn from each other's art, we learn from each other's inventions. On Friday evening, I was at an event which I was totally bowled over by the size of it. 2,500 people came to the Royal Festival Hall in London to listen to a discussion between the wonderful Nigerian writer Ben Okri and myself about the influences of ideas, of struggle, of literature on the struggles we make today and how we bring about a more peaceful and just world in the future. Never be afraid to take part in those debates and those discussions. We all come out of it stronger, better informed and more united. One of the Tolpuddle martyrs, George Lovelace, wrote a poem as he was sentenced to 7 years of transportation. And if I may, I will read part of it to you. From field, from wave, from plough, from anvil, and from loom, we come, our country's rights to save, and speak a tyrant faction's doom. We raise the watchword, liberty. We will be free. They made a sacrifice, as did many others, in that difficult period of the 19th century. But they won things as well. They won the Factories Acts. Later on, they won a universal mail franchise, and later, sadly much later, we won a universal franchise for everyone. When we campaign, we don't always win. But in those campaigns, we emerge stronger than we were before. I remember coming here in 1974. A Labour government had just been elected, a minority Labour government. We defeated the Tories, but we didn't have an overall majority in Parliament. It came on the back of the miners' dispute of 1972. It came on the back of the miners' strike of 74 and the 3-day week and the attack on the whole working class community by that government and its Industrial Relations Act, which sought to criminalise people for being trade unionists. And Michael Foot, the Secretary of State for Employment, as he then was, stood on this very platform and said, it's our movement, our marches, our struggles, our demands during the days when the Pentonville Five were imprisoned, when the engineering union's funds were sequestered, when so many other unions were placed under threat, that brought about the election of that Labour government, which brought about the 1975 Trade Union Act, which gave positive rights to be a member of a trade union, positive rights to be represented at the workplace. Wouldn't it be a good idea if, in the Tolpuddle Martyrs Festival of 2020, or perhaps sooner, a Labour Secretary of State for Employment came here to announce we were repealing the Trade Union Act and we were giving positive rights to workers at the workplace. So that beacon that was lit by the Tolpuddle Martyrs became a beacon for trade union rights and for liberty all around the world. We should also remember the sacrifices of so many others. Those others that were shot down as trade unionists as they tried to develop trade unionism in the United States in the late 19th century. Those that were killed in many other parts of the world trying to defend the principle of workers coming together to organise in strength, to protect and improve their conditions and improve the world for all of us. Today is a sad day for all of us who worked with the miners during the miners' strike of 1984-85, who remember the brutality of that government in the way that it sought to criminalise whole communities. The dreadful events that happened at Orgreave during that strike, and we want an inquiry into Orgreave. And we remember those that worked so hard to promote the miners' cause. And so it was with great sadness last night I learnt of the death of Davy Hopper, the General Secretary of the Durham Miners Association. I've known Davy for over 30 years, and he was a man that always stood for the miners, always stood for the community. And after, sadly, the pits had closed in Durham and elsewhere, the Miners' Gala went on. And he made the Miners' Gala bigger. And last week we were in Durham, Francis, myself, and many, many others were there in Durham. And I think I'm right in saying it was probably the biggest Durham Miners' Gala that's ever been, because it was the spirit of the miners and their defence of their community that is now reaching out to people working on 0 hours contracts in call centres, being grotesquely exploited, not just in this country, but all around the world. And so the Durham Miners' Gala last week was an amazing event, an amazing affair. Can we all send our solidarity and our sympathies to Durham Miners Association, to the National Union of Mine Workers, and all those that did so much, to Davy's widow Maria, and all of his much wider family on this very, very sad day. But in his memory, we will make the Durham Miners' Gala even bigger, because we united as a movement for justice. We work to defend, we work to extend, we work to promote. Can we send that message to Davy's family and the Durham Miners Association? Frances was so right when she talked about the new fear stalking the land. Since the referendum vote, the job losses, the investment that isn't happening, and the danger that there are to so many jobs and so many rights. We have to be united. We have to be united to defend what we've gained. The right to maternity leave, the right to paternity leave, the right to paid holiday. We have to extend it further and end the absurdity and obscenity of 0 hours contracts and insecure employment that exists in so many places. And we have a special responsibility as a movement not to allow the vile hate crime and hate attacks and xenophobia and racism that has disfigured some parts of our society and some parts of our communities over the past month or so. Quite simply, an attack on any place of worship, a synagogue, a mosque, a church, a temple, a chapel, an attack on an individual because they come from a different country, speak a different language, look different, is actually an attack on the ability of all of us to unite together to achieve a better life for everybody. So we will not allow the racists to divide us. We have to be strong together. That is what our movement is about. It's about trying to achieve a better world, a more equal world. My party, the Labour Party, was founded to try to bring about that sense of social justice, that ability to transform people's lives. And so, we oppose much of what this government does. I tell you this, when you stand up with a clear alternative that makes a lot of sense, you can actually win. So we defeated them when they tried to take tax credits away from 3 million people. And yes, it was a vote in Parliament, but votes in Parliament are influenced by what happens outside. So when we campaign against the obscenity of taking away those tax credits, it was the movement outside that made the difference. Just as when George Osborne, I'm not sure what job he's doing at the moment, but I'm sure he'll let us know, decided to take away personal independence payments. £4 billion a year was going to be taken away from people living with disabilities but living independently. Why were they living independently? Because all of us over many years had campaigned for justice, for equality, for opportunity, and to make sure that whatever the disabilities people were having to live with, they could still live independently, still make a contribution, and still be part of our society. Osborne thought he could take those personal independence payments away. 3 days later, they were shamed into withdrawing them. And so, I just say that because I'm quite certain that the new Chancellor, Mr. Hammond, will be back with us in October and November with an autumn statement with a big hole in the budget to fill. I just let him gently know that we will not allow that hole to be filled by taking money away from tax credits, money away from those with disabilities, or money away from education or health. I urge him instead to look at tax evasion, tax avoidance, tax havens, and all those that have not been making their contribution to our society. But we also embrace human rights. We defend the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. We support the European Convention of Human Rights. We support the European Court of Human Rights. We support the Human Rights Act that we have in this country because the right to free speech, the right to practice your faith, the right to assemble, the right to be a member of a trade union, the right to make your contribution to society is an international and universal one. And so our foreign policy must be, I think, dictated by solidarity with those that are suffering human rights abuses around the world. Those that can't assemble, those that can't meet, those that can't express themselves. And so I was particularly disgusted when it was a Tory government that tried to offer to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia the opportunity to run its prison system, with all those in prison merely for speaking out, speaking up for workers' rights, or speaking up for anybody else. We forced them to withdraw from that obscene contract of what they were trying to do. And as Marvin showed just now, we have won some very important elections, and it's a proud day and a privilege to me to be able to share a platform with Marvin Rees, just been elected Mayor of Bristol. What a fantastic achievement that was. And so, the Tolpuddle martyrs stood when they were told it was impossible, and they achieved a great deal. They didn't live to see it all, but I think they understood the spark they had set off. You're always told that things are too difficult, people are too powerful. Those that stood up against apartheid in South Africa in the 1950s, 1960s, 1970s, 1980s are always told it was too difficult. Successive Tory governments told us we had to trade with South Africa and be reasonable and constructive engagement and all the rest of it. At the end, the apartheid regime collapsed on its own contradictions because of the sacrifices of people in Soweto and so many other places, and because of international solidarity. It's that combination that brings about change. We were told we couldn't defeat the poll tax, yet we did. We were told you could never bring in a national minimum wage because it would interfere with the basic economy of the country. We did, we won that one, and we brought one in. And I want it to be a real living wage, and I send solidarity to those on the $15 an hour campaign in the USA, just as much as I send solidarity with those wanting a real living wage in Britain. But we've also been told that economic austerity was absolutely inevitable following the banking crash of 2008, 2009. So what do we have? 6 years of austerity, 6 years of cuts, 6 years of closures, libraries, swimming pools, waiting lists increasing in doctors' surgeries and hospitals, increasing housing waiting lists. What we're seeing is the real effects of austerity, hitting the poorest the hardest, hitting the community provisions the hardest, creating that unnecessary tension between dependent, often elderly people in a hospital not being able to release because there's no adult social care available for them because of the cuts that have taken place. People with mental health conditions not getting the help and support that they need. And so we challenge it. We challenge it and say quite simply this: the austerity they put forward was a political choice, not an economic necessity. John McDonnell has put that argument forward so well. And I tell you what, when you put an argument forward and you get united support for it, when you challenge the economic orthodoxy of cutting the living standards of the poorest in order to enhance the living standards of the very richest and call it political progress, when you challenge that, you get a lot of support. And after a while, you can't find anybody who doesn't agree with you. So we have changed the whole political and economic debate by the strength of our argument, by the unity of our purpose, by our determination that we want to live in a world that is more just, that is more equal, that young people do have real opportunities, not a lifetime of debt and insecure housing ahead of them. It does require government intervention. It doesn't require the rolling back of the state. It requires the attitude that everybody in our society matters, that we don't pass by on the other side while some people are homeless and destitute. So I want to thank the organisers of this great event and the South West TUC for all the great work it's done. All the great work it's done, bringing people together, and the pamphlets it's produced to try and bring about unity in all communities. But I also want to say this about poverty in Britain. At one level, it's very obvious. If you see a homeless person sleeping on the streets of a big city or hanging around the railway stations trying to survive, or a homeless person wandering onto a train in London, falling asleep and waking up in Scotland, wondering what's happened to them and being sent back. The levels of destitution and homelessness, food banks and all the other things that have risen because of inequality in our society are wrong and unnecessary. It's an attitude of mind that's important. But it's also important to recognise that poverty exists everywhere. Poverty can exist, yes, in a big city, in a badly maintained private rented sector flat. But it can also exist in a chocolate box village in the most beautiful countryside. It can also be poverty in rural Britain, where there are very few bus services, limited employment opportunities, and in Devon and Cornwall, some of the lowest wages across the whole of the country. And so those that founded the Agricultural Workers' Union did so, yes, to bring about security of employment, the Tide Cottage issue, and so many other things, and not to work in dangerous conditions, not to be given dangerous chemicals to use, to be able to work more safely driving a tractor, a combine harvester, or whatever else they were doing on a farm. But they also did it for the communities as a whole. And so when we're wanting a more inclusive, more equal society, we want it for the whole country, not just for the urban areas, but for the rural areas as well, so that we bring that sense of unity and solidarity together. The Tolpuddle martyrs showed us what happens when you stand up, those lessons that ripple down the generations. The miners who tragically lost their jobs after the strike in 84, 85. The lesson is still around there. But the lessons often have to be learnt again and again. Orgreave, we've learnt from. Shirebrook was a place where miners worked and dug coal together in the union, together with reasonable housing, together with pretty good wages compared to what followed. What have we got there now? Sport direct, 0 hours contracts, insecure employment, and grotesque levels of appalling management within that company. That's why we need a different strategy on employment rights and employment law. That's why we need positive rights at the workplace. That's why we need better working conditions for all. That's why we need to invest in housing. Yes, council housing to give people security of tenure. But above all, it's about empowering people together, so that we don't accept this narrative that somehow or other the post-war generation got the best. They got the NHS, they got the housing, they got the pensions, but somehow or other the Reaganomics of the 70s and the rollback the state economics that followed is something that's got to last for all time. Surely human brilliance and human endeavour can say that with all the achievements of science and technology, we can run our politics differently and better, so that the next generation is better off than this generation. So that generation can look forward to a world, yes, of greater security, and yes, of greater environmental sustainability as well. The two things do go hand in hand, they're not mutually exclusive. When we come together at festivals like this, we're empowered, emboldened and made stronger. When we go away from here, we've learned and benefited from the experience of each other and what they've achieved. That's what takes us forward. That's what takes us forward to challenge the orthodoxy that accepts exploitation and instead places forward a new orthodoxy of solidarity, community, working together to achieve for all in our society. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jeremy. And let's give Jeremy the big rounds of applause he needs to get that strength to fight the fight for us. Jeremy Corbyn, the next Prime Minister.